that it's all about space making. It's all about experiencing the physical space which every artist is inhabiting here, but the experience has come out in a very different way.
What does space mean to you?
When I talk about space, I am particularly talking about architectural space, because for me it's a clothing we wear all the time. It's a second skin.
It's a clothing we wear all the time.
Yeah,
that's
it's a
very interesting way
skin
to
to us, because we are always in architecture, never out of it. Even maybe in the road, but that's a cityscape we are talking about.
You're still in that space.
City architecture, urban architecture. So we are always in architecture. So for me, space is defined through architectural space.
The first artist, 𝗪𝗶𝗃𝗵 Sandeep looks at the idea of space through light and shadow. For him, how a light falls and what it does really defines the idea of space. That's his starting point, and that's what he does. What's interesting is sometimes it is rather abstracted. You can't quite tell where he might be. And then there are times when you can tell that looks like he's there is doorways and there's window, etc. He uses layers of paper. So where you see a thick sort of a surface, there are as many as 9 sheets of paper in the thickest sort of an area. And where you see it is really sort of thin, there's probably 1 or 2 sheets of paper. So that's what he sort of plays, and he paints on it.
Yeah, so when I looked at these works, interestingly, it's very, in a defined way, it's about architecture because of the doors and the windows we see. But the architecture we live in are so defined lines, straight lines, very sharp ones. But here, nothing is sharp, nothing is so defined in the way of like a straight line. So I was just wondering, what is it? And to me, it looks like something which is a shadow on water, reflection of something on water, or sometimes in air, something like that, in the sky. So I responded to these works in that manner, where it's a shadow of its own self. It's a reflection of its own self, which is coming on, and the distortion and the movement and everything which is there. And also the color palette, which is so Scandinavian.
But I think what was very interesting is the way you said a cold country, where a winter day
or a winter night.
Or a winter night, there is a certain tonality to it. And it's very interesting that it gets defined by, the weather and the entire atmosphere of that place.
Yeah.
And a very interesting takeaway for me, the work feels like a shadow falling on a fluid surface, whether it's a fluttering piece of cloth or a flowing water, the shadow is also a little flowing.
The form itself is like flowing.
Exactly. Yeah. Although of a rigid object or a building.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So it was quite interesting that way. Then also the color palette is very contradictory to where the person is coming from.
Right.
So I was just wondering, it's like a dreamscape then. Because nothing is matching to the reality where one is coming from.
Correct. So, not even the shadows, which is supposed to be the most real thing.
Yeah.
𝗪𝗶𝗃𝗵 is an artist based in Baroda. Again, line and grid making is integral to what he does. This might feel very controlled line making and therefore very conscious. He says it is actually the lightness and playfulness that comes in his work. There is an idea of a blank line without making an ink mark. There is the closeness of lines that start to make it weighty and dark and black, whereas there are lighter areas. Of course, there are grids, etc. as well. But on this idea of letting loose and playful in what seems to be so controlled, Parul had a very, very interesting point of view. Also, that runs parallel to her own way of working.
So before you came, I was actually stuck with this particular work because, of course, the direct connection is you instantly start to see Nasreen's grid works here. But somehow, not going there, I started to see the floor here. So the grid is something we live with continuously, constantly, all the time. The square is something which our areas are divided by, and it doesn't leave us. But I was fascinated by the theory of the artist that, it kind of frees playfulness. And for me, I understand that playfulness in the structure because when you are defined in a structure, you start to see infinity within it. And these kind of works comes with a certain programming, which in my case, I give myself a set of instructions when I make such works, and then the set of instruction takes over. I do not have to use my conscious mind while making it then. And my subconscious travels to different planes and stuff. So that's a fun element when I am myself doing such work, which looks very tedious and structured on the surface, but it actually this work which allows a lot of freedom while one is making. So the process is actually free. And I could see that, because when he started, he said it's very contradictory. I'm like, no, it's not contradictory, it's actually aligning, because the conscious and the subconscious is working on different planes here.
Rather interesting, when you're just defining a set of rules as a codification, then your mind need not be there. Then your mind can take a vacation, go to the hills, right? Because it's just the mechanics of it. So that is the sense of freedom probably that he sort of, once he's defined, he's really following that. But he's also interested in this idea of lightness in his living and being. We
one
get
could
bogged
see the
down.
gravity here.
Correct.
Like, there's gravity and there's air, which is very clearly defined. And these, the empty lines, the indentations which you're talking about, are not much there on the lower side of it.
Because it's filled up.
Yeah, though there's even this space is very filled up, but the visual of it doesn't feel like that. So it's like air we are seeing. It's almost filled with everything, but
you don't see it. You don't visualize it.
But that experience quality which I started with, how we experience, our body continuously experience things. We do not just see from our eyes, we use our other senses as well.
Absolutely.
And it's the other sense which comes into play. It's that freedom and the experience of being in the space and the body coming in. So a lot of times we think that we are just thinking and seeing through the visuals. We are not realizing that our body is continuously feeling the coldness, the hotness, the smell, the texture when we feel a wall. When there is the cemented wall, our body unknowingly knows to be away from it. So these are subconsciously we have experienced throughout the process of living itself that the body knows. And those experiences come into the work. Just the way this indentation line, that empty line has come in here. So it's very beautiful in this particular work.
Of course, and then there are these works that almost start feeling like fabric.
Yes, I was talking about
woven fabric, right? 𝗪𝗓 is very fascinated with scaffoldings, because scaffolding is something that you use when you are constructing a building. And when you construct a building, it is, again, space making, right? So a very, very architectural construction industry thing. And she uses this sort of single wire. She welds herself. She does not use support of a welder. And how she bends the wire, sometimes fuses them really up close, sometimes spaced out, is this play that she sort of ends up creating. Smaller sculptures, each of the metal rod is a line. And what she's done here is she's created a shadow, a version of the shadow as might fall with these objects. The shadow that she's created is graphite, and she has blurred the vision because that's how a shadow, would be, right? Appears in a sort of not precise, crisp clarity at times. And then these works sort of come together, the main work and the reference of it.
So when we were talking about this particular one as the idea of scaffolding, it's also the structure, the grid. Scaffolding is a grid to construct around and stuff like that. So we are talking about grid, but then the grid comes in here in the form of shadow. Few elements coming in, not defined particularly separately, but they all are coming in like a window. The shadow currently constructed by the light here, the shadow which the artist has made on the paper and cut out as a window. It's quite fascinating, and everything is so subtle, but connected and very much present in a very minimal way, with the idea of sculpture and drawing.
Aditya Mandlek is another artist who lives and works in Bombay and is an architect. He practices as an architect. What he is interested in is the idea of us coming up close and magnifying something to see the clear white and black. Each line is very clear. There's the clear demarcation. But if we take a step back, quite literally, and think of it even metaphorically, these lines become tones of gray. There is blurriness, and those demarcations are no more very stark. So he's interested in the micro life and us as humans and our space and their space. He's just interested in bringing it all together and, isn't it all part of one big?
Yeah, so when we were discussing about this particular work or seeing this one, to me, it reminded me of Indian miniature paintings. So-called distortion of the perspective, which is taught to us in the Western way of looking at perspective. Indian miniature painting, where the architecture is, or the building, the background is always built in a certain perspective, which looks distorted. So yeah, that was my take on this thing. And then I also felt that, even like there's a clear demarcation, but there's so much happening here that one requires a lot of time to see what's happening in each work. And it's like a city in a small space. It's like,
True.
The idea of space is distorted here also. Like, you are creating a whole cityscape in like maybe 6 inches.
Correct. I think there's a lot of discovery that you can have while you're observing and enjoying these works.
Yeah.
Parul's work. Parul lives in Delhi, but in an area which is very densely constructed. And because of the dense construction, at times the space between buildings, especially as they go up, is so little that the space to see the sky or to get direct sunlight is actually very limited. So Parul is just really, series called Mapping the Sky. She's literally looking at a typical pattern of, in between the buildings, when you see a sliver of line, depending on how the buildings are jutting in and jutting out and turning. She's just studied that as a form and just played around and accentuated just that form. In reverse, using the graphite powder that sort of made it all black, or in sort of naked embossing, and then played around with lines at times sort of again straight lines or playful lines.
I was like, wow, daylight is a privilege. We don't think of daylight being such an important privilege in our lives when we have it in abundance. And I mean, of course, being in Delhi, lived in Delhi, grew up in Delhi, or any density in the country, we all have walked through these lanes, small lanes where there's literally no daylight. I mean, there's no source of daylight also in the home. Even the sources where there's literally no daylight around us. So yeah, and talking about that, and then I went to see her other works in this other gallery. Work kind of really, it's very interesting in a way what she's talking about here. I mean, she's talking about the light, she's talking about the denseness, but the experience of both is actually it's like going to a same point, but through 2 different lanes. And I could feel that even in this one, the denseness in this emptiness, and over there as well. And it was interesting to me that, she could create the denseness in the emptiness with the whiteness.
But, did you think of using all white pretty much and a lot of black? Was it like day and night for you?
Yeah.
आपने ऐसा उसको सोच के बनाया, या ये ऐसा हो गया तो बाद में इंटरप्रेट कर रहे हैं, ये तो रात दिखता है, ये दिन दिखता है?
ऐसे मतलब दिन और रात का मैंने नहीं सोचा था, बट मुझे ये था कि वो जो थोड़ी भी लाइट है वो ऐसे शाइन जो थोड़ी सी भी है वो भी एटलीस्ट को शाइन कर रही है, वो इसी दिख रही है.
She added one very interesting point that दिन में अंधेरा होता है पर रात को रोशनी होती है, क्योंकि रात को लाइटें जलती हैं, लाइटें जलती हैं. Again, coming back to what I started with, the experience of space. How everyone is experiencing so differently in their own lives that, and then what comes out is their personal experience then, of what they are looking in.
Okay, Niyati Chadha is a mid-career artist, really works with geometric abstraction as her idiom. She, was bedridden for quite some time and therefore had all the time through the day to observe the space within which she was confined. Every ray of sun falling, forming shadows, folds and creases of the bed cover, of the blanket, everything around her, really she became extremely sensitive to some of those experiences. And I think this is a bit of an emotional expression of some of that observation. But I think what becomes interesting, and Parul, I would love for you to talk about how she uses the frame and sort of creates and leaves space where she doesn't create anything, as to what that does in the way you look at
the
each
idea
work.
Of composition.
Composition, yeah.
How do we place? Because we are so much talking about space, but every paper is also a space defined by the length and the width of it. And where do we demarcate? How do we decide on that space, that size first of all, and where do we put what we had to put, draw what we have to draw, paint what we have to paint, in what area of that, there. It's like on the corner, over here also in the corner, over there it's a diagonal. It's coming out, and this particular one is actually trying to move out of the space of the paper.
Pretty much, right, absolutely.
Yeah,
And then this is very central.
Yeah, this is very central. And the folds and everything, of course, I could see the folds in the form of the light and the folds of the elements in the space. When you start to see, when you are so confined in one room or anything, then there's so much to see. Again, going back to the idea of limitness and the infinity in limits. How sometimes the limit itself is freedom. And then you start to see things. Because my practice in particular started with that idea only, when I start to see just one thing. But yeah, one could start to see things in that moment, in that space, and that starts to define a lot in terms of how and what you are looking at.
I think what's extremely fascinating is a statement when you have things really defined and constrained. It's very liberating.
Yeah, it's very liberating.
So when you listen to it, it feels like two opposites. Confinement and liberation are actually two opposite words. Confinement is when you're in a jail cell, you're confined. And liberation is when you're free. But now just, when we think of this as a concept, a definition is liberating. You freed yourself from a lot of
and now you're just working
imagination
with
of possibilities.
It is, and the four is like multitude. The four is infinite, and then you can create infinity through that four.
Nilanjan moved to a new city. He moved to Bhubaneswar, and for the first time he got introduced to this idea of spaces in an urban city like Bhubaneswar divided based on income categories. So there are certain areas that are defined high income group areas, HIG, and then there is the LIG, the low income group area. The high income group areas are not very dense. They're low income group areas are smaller, more dense. But what was also interesting is the city will provide more privileges and amenities in high income group areas. There'd be open parks, there'd be trees, big roads. All right, so far so good. And then what he started noticing was in these parks, there was these open air gyms. There was these equipments that were left in HIG parks, right? And what was even more hilarious and fascinating, it's actually the people of LIG who would come and use those equipments, because the people living in that area were going to private gyms, air-conditioned private gyms. So he just found the whole thing to be quite upside down and sort of humorous, hilarious, but also quite telling of the way the society and the way we are.
Yeah.
And he's used material which we were talking about, the concrete board.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating how the political side of the city is also reflected through all this, and the perception which the government has in terms of what they can provide to the high income group, and what the perception high income group people themselves have for themselves, like, what they need and desire. It's all about perception and how we look at it. And it's interesting to see this particular work for me. Yeah. And yeah, we were talking about the materiality, the concrete, which is so much about the structure, the urban landscape and everything.
No, absolutely. I think, and therefore, choice of material becomes incredibly important because it's a piece of information. You're communicating through, what you're using. It's not just the imagery, right?
But this work is very different from every other work here because it's a very direct statement in a way.
True.
To one's experience of life, to one's experience of hierarchy, to one's experience of social hierarchy, so
Correct.
In that sense this work is very, very different from everything else, because those works are more about the personal experiences of the daily life, of living in a constrained space or whatever space. But this is more like hitting hard
in your face and there, right? 𝗁𝙧𝙤𝗵 lives in Calcutta. He spent, like probably many of us, spent a lot of the summer vacations in grandparents' home. So his grandparents were in Bhawanipur, which is not far from Calcutta. In 2012, the house of 𝗁𝙧𝙤𝗵𝗵 Nani was torn down. Everybody moved away. 𝗁𝙧's grandmother also passed away, so the house was really torn down. So he's, and this is quite a telling image actually, because it was just this weirdly plotted house that remained original. Everything else around, had billboards and construction and everything. So it was like this one well that was left, that the way he explains, everything around it was constructed. But what he's doing is, bringing elements, and like memory, sometimes, our thought process, our memory, it's much like dreams. Sometimes it's irrational, erratic. Sometimes it's bits and pieces. It's never a cohesive story that you remember. You forget something, you forget names, etc. So he's really bringing some of these kind of pieces and elements and bringing it together. There is this idea of absence. The cat is actually missing. So, absence is creating the presence. The absence of this figure is actually creating the presence. So he's really utilizing that. One last point before Parul jumps in. He uses natural indigo to paint on Nepali rice paper. He also paints on shola, which is a material used in Bengal. He also pastes that and uses that.
No, I want to take it up from the idea of absence, because that absence is very much present in the work of, in her works as well, about the absence of light, and here is absence of, I won't say memory, because memory makes the absence present.
Right.
But it's so much about, and yeah, I mean, through memory, he is thinking about the absence of what's not there in the current life or whatever it is. So it's quite nostalgic and, yeah, about memory and all, and fascinated that, how architecture is shaping all this, how space making is shaping this experience of memory as well. So that's something fascinating to see, like, even like, if we talk about that first, the works of that artist there, I could somehow relate on so many levels on, like, a dreamscape, memory, all those things. So in this whole structure here,
all of this, the arches,
yeah,
even all
these,
of this.
These small little elements are very architectural.
Correct.
Like,
Arjun lives in Gurgaon and he works in Delhi. He is an architect and constantly deals with space making and space defining. He's also a photographer, and this work therefore is photographic digital work. If you see up close, you will see each of the work has 9 dots. There are 9 dots in every work over here. Okay, one of the dots is actually a bolder presentation, and all others are smaller dots. So there are 8 small dots and 1 bold dot. What he's doing, it's a bit of a sort of a metaphysical imagination. These are 9 consecutive moments. So right now, as we are in this moment, there is a bus outside, there is a man walking, there's a dog barking. There are many moments in parallel right now. So he's really just picking 9 consecutive moments. The bold dot represents the moment where this image is. It's an architectural image, and in each of the works there is a human figure, there is a presence of human, but at the same time the identity is taken away with a broad rectangular white line that is hiding or taking away the face. This to him represents the rigidity and control in the imagery, which is actually quite fluid, and you can imagine this image extending into the white and beyond. You know, there is no real demarcation. At times, he's left it sort of endless. Not a very defined and a rigid imagery. Jackson Pollock's painting, there is no beginning, there is no end, it just expands, right? So that is sort of his entire idea, obviously heavily altered digitally, introduction of colors and definitions sort of come in, but that's his play.
No, when I was looking at these works, for me it's like there's so many parallel things happening within one image. As you talk about the 9 movements, I'm thinking about those different movements within one movement, those different places that one person could have been doing whatever, but this is particular movement which is defining this particular image here. So what's going on in his mind? And on microscopic level, on macroscopic level, on architectural level, on metaphysical level, there's so much happening. And also, I want to talk about the color here, which I don't know why he chose this particular 2 shades of yellow, or 2 or 3 shades of yellow with the grayscale photographs, which is quite fascinating to bring in together the whole idea of color in this sense. And so much happening in this particular work, which is undefined here. Because I don't see it neither political nor personal. Correct. It's personal in some sense.
It's observational.
It's observational, but hiding. It's hidden, it's revealing. There's so many contradictory elements coming in.